I think that's why we are at a critical turning point. As they say, we are the fork in the road. Either we choose the path of trying to find a stable world order under multilateral rules, multilateral norms, where it's fair to everybody. It's fair to US, fair to China, fair to Russia, fair to Europe, and so on and so forth. Or you go down a path where the world breaks up, where, for example, there could be a complete bifurcation between the United States and China. Then the rest of the world will be in a very difficult place, trying to decide, are we going to spend closer to the US, closer to China? It's a very difficult decision. So that's why it'd be wiser. And the reason why a lot of my writings spread in the West is because the more thoughtful Western minds understand. I'm trying to help the West. I'm trying to explain to them the world is changing fundamentally, and you have to change your mindsets fundamentally. The fundamental mistake that most Western minds, including current European leaders like von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas, the foreign minister of Europe, and many American politicians, is that when they see China, all they see is the Chinese Communist Party. And they think, China is a very tightly run, repressive Communist Party system. And clearly, what is emerging in China, the big thing that's emerging is not a revival of communism. It's the revival of the world's oldest continuous civilization. Chinese civilization, for most of the 2,000 years, outperformed the rest of the world in so many ways. But they had 200 bad years. But they're coming out of the 200 bad years. And especially the century of humiliation, which they suffered from 1842 to 1949. And I keep telling my Western friends, I'm sure President Xi doesn't go to bed dreaming of reviving Karl Marx or Lenin or Stalin. He's dreaming about reviving the great Chinese civilization. Because that's a civilization which the West unwisely trampled on in the 19th century, unwisely. So now that China is re-emerging, it'd be best for the West to reach a new strategic compact with the newly emergent China. And that's what I'm trying to do in my writings. There are 8 billion people in the world. Only 12% live in the West. 88% live outside the West. And the vast majority of people in what's called the Global South, in Latin America, in Africa, and in most of Asia, they're not closing their doors to China. They're opening their doors to China. So the West, in some ways, by trying to cut itself off from China, is actually cutting itself off from most of the world, which is embracing China. I mean, if you go to Africa, at the end of the day, what is the priority of an African leader? To lift the standards of his people, to get investment in infrastructure, to build roads to the port, to build railways to the port. Who's doing that in Africa? It's China. And if you go even to Latin America, I was shocked to learn that the country in Latin America with one of the most advanced ports in the world, really high-tech ports, is in Peru. Completely built by China. And that's enhanced the competitiveness of Peru and its neighbors. So, the only country, in the past, the West used to do this. I mean, through World Bank, for example. But as you know, the World Bank has more or less stopped building infrastructure. So China today, if you are a leader of a Latin American country, and I give you an example from Latin America. The biggest country in Latin America is Brazil. 20 years ago, it took Brazil 1 year to export $1 billion to China. Today, it takes Brazil 72 hours to export $1 billion to China. So you think Brazil is going to cut off its ties with China just to please the West? So the West is completely unrealistic. And this is one thing that Henry Kissinger told me, that the quality of mind, especially of European leaders, has gone down because they're not looking at the different world and saying, how do we adjust? What do we do? How do we adapt? And when the rest of the world is adapting and the Europeans are not adapting, the Europeans are going to be left behind. When our former foreign minister of Spain, Josep Borrell, said that Europe is a garden surrounded by jungle, he wasn't wrong. In some ways, it's a garden. And it's true that the rest of the world is a jungle. In the long run, jungles are more powerful than gardens. Gardens cannot overtake jungles. Jungles can overtake gardens. So it is Europe that must adapt. And Europe is being very unwise. And I'll give you an example. Europe's long-term challenge is not going to come from Russian tanks. There'll be no Russian tanks going to Germany or France or whatever it is. Europe's long-term challenge is going to come from the demographic explosion in Africa. In the year 1950, Europe's population was double that of Africa's. Double. Yeah. Now, Africa's population is 2.5 times bigger than Europe. But by 2100, Africa's population could be 10 times bigger than Europe. So Europe has got to try and focus on what it can do to help Africa develop. Because if Africa doesn't develop, there'll be more Africans going to Europe. And that'll be the challenge for them. So therefore, Europe should welcome any investment in Africa. They should therefore welcome Chinese investment in Africa. It helps Europe. But it shows you how incredibly stupid European leaders are. They criticize Chinese investment in Africa.
Yeah.
I can't. What are you doing? You're shooting yourself in your own foot. Every dollar that China invests in Africa is a gift to Europe. And European leaders should write thank you notes to China and say, thank you, China, for investing in Africa. But the European leaders, instead of thanking China, are criticizing China, slapping China. So this shows you the lack of strategic common sense. It's very basic. This is not. This doesn't. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to work these things out. And yet the Europeans haven't. Unfortunately, there are none who are thinking carefully, strategically over the long run. Because, Europe needs, no European leader dares to say, hey, the world has now changed fundamentally. We have to reinvent ourselves and go back to basics. For example, they have to live with Russia for the next 100, 200, maybe 1,000 years. You got to find some kind of compromise with Russia. And I thought President Trump did the right thing when he invited President Putin to come to Alaska. Let's talk. Diplomacy was invented so you could talk to your enemies, not to your friends. Can you imagine? Europe has a much greater interest in Russia, how Russia does. No European leader would talk to Putin for so many years. Trump was doing the right thing. Europeans can't do the right thing. It doesn't mean you agree with Putin, but you got to talk to him. And the fact that President Trump not just spoke to Putin, he spoke to Kim Jong-un. And he was prepared to talk to anybody, including the new leader of Syria, who was declared a terrorist. But that's what diplomacy was invented for 2,000 years ago. Because, you don't need diplomatic immunity in talking to your friends. Diplomacy was invented because in the old days, when ambassadors went to talk to an enemy king, and when they would disagree with the enemy king, they would have their heads chopped off. Literally. Yeah. Literally, heads chopped off. So they said, okay, this doesn't work because how can you talk with a chopped off head? So that's why they created the concept of diplomatic immunity. So you can go into an enemy court, you can say things that will make the king unhappy, but you are safe. You walk out with your head on your shoulders. That's what diplomacy is for. So Donald Trump understands diplomacy. You have to talk to your enemies. That's why diplomacy was invented. Certainly, I accompanied Mr. Lee Kuan Yew when he did his farewell tour of Europe. And I was with him when we had dinner in number 10 Downing Street. And Mrs. Margaret Thatcher gave him a brilliant tribute to Lee Kuan Yew. But again, showing her understanding of geopolitical realities. Then we went to Paris and we met François Mitterrand. And François Mitterrand also had a very good global understanding of realities. Then we went to Germany and we met Helmut Kohl. And this is soon after the Berlin Wall had fell. Again, they understood the global picture. So the leaders of the caliber of Margaret Thatcher, François Mitterrand, Helmut Kohl, and I also got to know Helmut Schmidt, the previous chancellor. They have a different quality of mind. In fact, Helmut Schmidt would say to me he would read my writings. And because, I was trying to give a different point of view. And he wanted to listen to a different point of view. But right now, none of these European leaders are thinking long-term strategically about sacrifices, adjustments, painful adjustments that Europe would have to make. What's difficult for them, and you mentioned one legitimate point, they're so frightened of their own populations. They do not tell their populations the truth. Which is why former Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Jean-Claude Juncker, said, we European politicians, we know what to do, but we don't know how to get elected after we do the right thing. But I think I disagree with him. I think you can tell your people honestly that the welfare state has to be dismantled, because the French cannot afford the welfare state they have created because their deficits are too high. You can't pay for them. I have to make a very significant distinction between Europe and United States.
Yeah, it's very different.
Because Europe is a very depressed place. I mean, if you want to meet the most pessimistic young people of the world, go to Europe. Very few of them believe that they'll have a better life than their parents did. By contrast, United States is still a very strong, vibrant society. United States is still producing, look at the largest companies in the world. I mean, it's amazing. When I was growing up in the 1980s, whatever it is, I'd never heard of Google, never heard of Apple, never heard of Microsoft, never heard of, Facebook, and never heard. Look at it. Amazing. These are the biggest companies in the world. They didn't exist when I was growing up. Only the United States can produce this incredible world-beating companies. And at the same time, I've lived in the United States for over 14 or 15 years altogether, because I was ambassador to the UN for 10 years, spent 2.5 years in Washington, D.C., 1 year on sabbatical in Harvard. And since I know American society, it is still very vibrant and dynamic in terms of the ambitions of the Americans. So I wouldn't put the West in one category. I'd make a distinction between the United States, which will continually reinvent itself. And in my book, Has China Won? The key message I put in the first part of the book is never underestimate the United States of America. Winston Churchill once said very wisely, you can always count upon the United States to do the right thing after they have explored every other option.
Yeah.
Very funny, but true.
Yeah.
But the Americans, have a way of reinventing themselves. So it's a remarkable society. We should continue to watch it and work with it too.
What's the biggest strength of the United States and the society of the United States?
Well, I think the biggest strength of the United States, it has a very Darwinian form of competition. The state doesn't save you. And in the companies, you either succeed and thrive, or you fail, you're killed. And certainly there's a lot of creative destruction within the American economy. So very large companies which are number one in the world, like Kodak, for example. When I grew up, again, as a child in Singapore, the best films were made in America, Kodak. And everyone thought that Kodak would be number one in the world forever. Gone. So, the very Darwinian form of competition that goes on. And I think that explains the vigor and strength of the American economy. I studied philosophy, and my master's thesis did a comparison of the concepts of freedom and equality in the writings of John Rawls and Karl Marx. John Rawls, was the greatest political philosopher of the United States in recent times. And John Rawls says that the most just society is a society that takes care of the bottom 10%. And sadly, even though Rawls was a very successful philosopher in the United States does a very bad job taking care of its bottom 10%. By contrast, Singapore as a society probably takes better care of its bottom 10% than almost any other society in the world.
So it's very different.
Very different.
Very different, yeah.
Singapore is still a society, I mean, as you know, the PAP was founded. The ruling party of Singapore was founded as a democratic socialist party. And the government is very, very committed to providing a safety net for everybody. And that's why in Singapore, most people enjoy access to good housing, good healthcare, good education, good infrastructure, good employment. So all this is the result of a government that works incredibly hard. And you know, the advice I give to the United States is the advice that President Bill Clinton gave to the United States. Now, President Bill Clinton gave a speech in Yale in 2003, a brilliant speech. He said, if America is going to be number one forever, then we can keep on doing what we're doing. We're number one. Then Bill Clinton added a but, which is very unusual. But if we can conceive of a world where we are no longer the dominant political, military, economic, cultural superpower, then he adds, surely it is in America's interests to strengthen multilateral rules, multilateral norms, multilateral processes, multilateral institutions that would then create a stable world in which America can live in as number two.
As number two, he said. Wow.
Yeah, he was very careful. He didn't say number two.
Yeah.
No, Bill Clinton is very, very smart. No politician in America can say the words that America will become number two. You cannot.
You cannot. Yeah.
If you say that, you're finished politically.
Yes, yes.
In fact, Bill Clinton wanted to give this speech that he gave in 2003 after he stepped down. You know, if you look at my book, The Great Convergence, I described the process. You know, his Deputy Secretary of State was a friend of mine, Stroop Talbot, an American journalist at the time. And Stroop Talbot describes in his book how Bill Clinton wanted to give that same speech when he was president. You know, let's prepare for becoming number two. And all his advisors said, Mr. President, if you give a speech saying America should prepare for becoming number two, you'll be dead. Dead meat. Americans cannot, no American politician can use the words that America can become number two. But you know, it can happen. Surely it can happen. So why not prepare for it? So I think what the United States needs now is a strategic reboot and to think long-term and strategically, what kind of world does America want to live in when it is no longer as dominant in the way that it was in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. You know. It's a different world that's coming. In fact, I know the new world that is coming, the texture and chemistry of this world will be very different because we are also ending 200 years of Western domination of world history. That's coming to an end too. So we are moving from a mono-civilizational, unipolar, unilateral world towards a world that I describe as a 3M world. 3M is multi-civilizational, many successful civilizations, multipolar, many different poles of power, you know, including India, Russia, Japan and others, and also multilateral. But you strengthen multilateral institutions in an interdependent world. So the nature of the world order that is coming is very different from the one that we've had over the last 80 years since World War II. But you know, when you give birth to a new world order, there are lots of birth pangs.
Yeah.
Giving birth is very painful. I've been present when my children were born. I know how painful it is. In the year 2000, China's share of global manufacturing was only 5%. 5%.
Yeah.
By 2030, it is likely to reach 45%. Now, do you think China went from a 5% share to 45% share absent-mindedly? No. It's a result of very careful, thorough, long-term planning with the right strategic decisions on which industries to invest in the industries of the future, in solar power, in wind turbines, in battery technology, in electric vehicles. Those were strategic, long-term decisions that were made a long time ago. And that's an example of how strategic thinking, long-term strategic thinking, So the Chinese are already anticipating what the problems will be 10 years from now, and what do you do today to take care of the problem of 10 years from now? No European leader, not one, is saying, Europe's problem 10 years from now is this. I better take care of it now. No. They're only thinking, how do I get re-elected next year? I'm bullish for China's prospects. I'm equally bullish, if not more bullish, for India's prospects. Because, I'm not ethnically Chinese. I'm ethnically Indian. And I've been going to India regularly. And now the level of confidence that the Indians have in their own future is about the highest they have had in the centuries. So that's why I'm very confident that India will do well too. And in some ways, if you want to know the potential of Chinese and Indians, of China and Chinese people and Indian people, just go to the most competitive human laboratory in the world, which is the United States of America. Which ethnic groups are the ones that are most successful within the United States?
Indians by far.
Indians by far.
Yes.
In fact, the Indians have the highest per capita income of any ethnic group in the United States. And look at how many of the biggest companies in the world have Indian CEOs. Google has an Indian CEO. Microsoft has an Indian CEO. So, India is a country with tremendous potential. But of course, I want to emphasize one point. Both China and India will succeed, but they'll succeed in different ways. Because they're different civilizations, different cultural traits. India will not succeed like China in the same way.